So our next speaker, Andrew Kimbrell. Andy, I must admit, he is one of my superheroes. So Andy has been a champion, at least for the last 15 to 20 years, for the preservation and the protection of all of our foods, our farms, and our environment. Andy is the executive director of the International Center for Technology Assessment in Washington, D.C., and he is also the executive director of the Center for Food Safety that has offices in Washington, D.C., San Francisco, and Portland. Andy is one of the leading environmental lawyers in the United States, and over the last 15 years, it has been my observation that many NGOs in the United States have taken up this issue of the genetic engineering of agriculture and its effects on public health and on environment, but very few organizations have persisted with this topic because it is a very, very difficult topic. The Center for Food Safety has persisted while others have fallen away. And I think the reason they were so successful is that they have been litigating in the courts. So Andy is also an author of numerous books and articles on environment, technology, and society and food issues. And for the past 10 years, his work has centered on the issues of grassroots work and policy on food issues. He was one of the world's leading visionaries that has been announced by the Utne Reader. And so all the way from the East Coast, please give a warm welcome and aloha for Andy Kimbrell.
Aloha, I'm delighted to be here. I want to thank everyone who made this possible. It's such a delight to be with Vandana again, by the way, it's been a few years, but it's been absolutely great to see you again. I want to thank several people, especially the Ceres Trust that's making all of this possible. Kent and Judy, you're right here in the front row. Thank you so much for making this possible. We also, and that rousing great organizer that Walter is, he mentioned the labeling bill. We were in the legislature today, very good hearing on the labeling bill, and I want to give a shout out to the man who wrote that bill and has been pushing it like crazy and doing such a great job, Paul Achitoff of Earth Justice. Where are you? Paul, where are you? Thank you, Paul. Fantastic work. And I cannot but help mention a couple of things about my fellow speakers here, and of course, the first time I met Walter Riddy was in 2005 in Molokai. He'd been working with our Center for Food Safety scientist, Bill Fries, on some of the Terra work. And I showed up because I was interested in how we could make things go further. Walter had an immediate mistrust of me because I am an attorney, which is completely understandable. But after about a half hour, he sort of warmed up and realized he's not that kind of an attorney. And so we were talking about how you're going to follow up on this fantastic work that Walter did to stop the genetic engineering of Hawaiian taro. And so I can't remember if it was Bill or me or somebody said, you know what, there's probably patents on these things. So, Walter, we were at this sort of outdoor table. He goes, you can't patent our elder brother. What's going on with that? So we went back to D.C. We looked up the patents. We sent them to Walter, and that's the last I heard of it. I didn't think much would come of it. And I heard then that you'd presented a letter to the regents of Hawaii who own the patent on these 3 taro strains that go all the way back, by the way, ancient strains all the way back to the Polynesian beginnings. So it was really an outrage that they had patented them. And then the next I hear, there's this call from the University of Hawaii. Apparently, as Walter explained, they had basically occupied the building and locked it. And they said, wait a minute, Andy, and Bill was with me, and they said, they're saying that if they give up the patent, somebody else will get it. So it won't do any good. Well, that's just not right. I mean, if you have already have a patent, then it's not novel, and no one else, they were trying to pull something over on Walter and the gang. So we said, hey, that's not true. If they give it up, it's over. And the next thing we saw was the picture of Walter ripping up the patents. And I've got to tell you, we have spent years And I know Vandana has done a fantastic work in getting rid of the patent on basmati rice, which was one of the great victories ever against patenting. That took years. We, Center for Food Safety, we've gotten rid of patents on broccoli, a number of other plants. We've even gotten rid of patents on horses and rabbits and cats, believe it or not. It's a long story. But I have never, this is the only instance I've ever known where a patent holder, because of public pressure, without having to go to court, ripped up their own patents and give it. So it really is unique, absolutely unique accomplishment. So, you know, there's an old expression which says if you have something to do, give it to a busy person. If you have something to do, give it to this man, because it'll get done. So that was my introduction to Walter. I had a similarly interesting introduction to Vandana Shiva. It was 1989. I'm not sure if you remember this, Vandana. And we held the very first international NGO meeting on global warming. And there was 55 people there, and at the last minute, C-SPAN decided to cover it, which is really great, because people take it a lot more seriously if there's television cameras. And it was run by the organization I was part of, which is Foundation on Economic Trends at the time, and the World Resources Institute. And everyone was talking a lot of science, and about 15 minutes in, Vandana, who was already conspicuous by the dignity of her appearance and her somewhat skeptical look at most of us, got up and she said, you know, I'm a little disturbed about some of the language that's being used. And what's the problem? She said, well, you keep calling us the undeveloped world. And she said in India and in many countries like this for aeons, for millennia, we have lived in relative harmony with the land. You in the West, in barely 150 years, have threatened the entire survival of the planet through what you're doing. So she said, how about this, says Vandana. By the way, C-SPAN, TV cameras moving now. Everyone's seeing this across the country, right? Repeated many times. And she says, from now on in this conference, we call you the undeveloped world, and you call us the developed world. And they did. So that was my introduction to Vandana Shiva. True story, absolute true story. I am a lawyer, that is true though. And worse than that, I'm a Washington, D.C. lawyer, and there's actually more lawyers per capita in Washington, D.C. than anywhere else in the world. I was in a taxi cab the other day though, and the guy asked me what I did, and I said, I'm a lawyer. He said, really? I've got a question for you then, if you're such a good lawyer. What's the difference between a lawyer and a sperm? And even though I'm supposed to be a bioethicist, I had no answer. And he said, well, the sperm has at least a 1 in 1 million shot at becoming a human being. Ouch. But I'm not that kind of a lawyer. And you know, as Walter, you know, these battles, and all of us, everybody in the audience who's doing, you know, we know how difficult and brutal these battles are. But I think we should, you know, I want to, for a moment before I spend about 15 or 20 minutes just going over some of the things I've been asked to talk about, which is sort of putting some of this in perspective. I just want to go over something just so we all remember it. You know, Monsanto and Dow, DuPont, Syngenta, and Bayer, let's not forget there's a bunch of other folks besides Monsanto that are doing some very nasty stuff in GMOs. They can appear like they're monolithic. How do you stop these guys? How can you stop them, you know? And, but let me remind all of us that through the work of a great many people, including my organization, but many others, Earth Justice, we already mentioned, but many others throughout the country, in the last 15 years, we have stopped genetically engineered tomatoes. Remember the Flavor Saver tomato that had no flavor to savor? Gone. The BT potato, that was commercialized. McDonald's was going to use it. We went to McDonald's, which was a traumatic experience, but successful. And they refused to use it, that was gone. We have stopped genetically engineered tomatoes, potatoes, genetically engineered wheat. Imagine if all those wheat products were genetic. We stopped that through litigation and through Grassroots. Genetically engineered rice, stopped. Genetically engineered bent grass, stopped. Genetically engineered biopharmaceuticals. This was this nutty idea of growing vaccines. And the Monsanto and other folks had come together, you know, they were going to grow them all across the country. Through litigation, some again due to Earth Justice, some that we did, we stopped that. We've stopped genetically engineered alfalfa, for 6 years, and we're back in court right now. We just had our oral argument on October 24th of this year. I think we're going to beat them again. Right? And then remember BGH? How many people here remember BGH? Remember BGH? Yeah, what happened to BGH? Well, Monsanto, you know, they won originally. That is a case I lost in 1992, and that we lost in 1992. And Monsanto then decided to try and stop dairies from labeling BGH free. And they went to the Federal Trade Commission and said, forbid it. We argued, and we won. They went to the 13 different states, trying to get states to prevent labeling of BGH, so the voluntary labeling. And we beat them in every state except Ohio. There we had to go to court, and we eventually won. So what did Monsanto do? Once people knew and had the ability to choose and could see labels, they sold the product. So BGH is gone, their flagship product. So that shows the ability of grassroots organizing. It shows the ability to beat Monsanto. So not only can it be done, it has been done over and over and over again, and it will happen here, and we will beat them here. No question about that. All right, just quickly, I want to sort of go over a little bit of the background that might be helpful in this discussion. I grew up in a time of kind of the romanticism, the utopian romanticism of a certain kind of agricultural technology. Some people in this audience look like they might be of the same vintage. You don't have to raise your hand, sorry. I see your faces, you see mine. But there's, you can shout out though when I ask this question, better living. Mm-hmm. You remember that one? Better living through chemistry? And progress is our most important product. And later on, progress is our middle name, which is kind of cute, you know. But what happened was, do people here remember the Jetsons? What do the Jetsons eat? The Jetsons ate little yellow pills. That was their food. Now they did it with a knife and fork, if you remember. But that's what that was the vision. Remember what they drank? Yeah, it was an orange substance which we assumed was Tang, and that was sold to us because Tang was the drink of the... This is my kind of crowd. You guys know this. Absolutely right. But you know, behind that vision, you know, yes, it was a cartoon, but that's a very scary vision. What a frightening vision of food and drink. What a scary idea that that was our future. But that was what we were being sold. That ever greater mechanization, reduction of food was our future. And because in our country at that time there was ever greater urbanization, most people didn't know what was really going on in the land. But we do know what was going on now, don't we? In my lifetime, we've lost 10 million farmers in the United States off the land. 5 million farms. We have lost 90%, at least commercially, 90% of our vegetable and fruit seed varieties. We're losing our topsoil at 15%, the rate to which it can be replenish itself. 75% of all the species on the endangered species list are there because of farming or ranching. 75%. And when I edited a book on this called Fatal Harvest, some people accused me of being rhetorical, which usually is a good criticism. But in this case, it wasn't, because, you know, in 1890, they did a study of suicides in the United States, and the number one group that was suicidal of occupations was accountants and bookkeepers, which, frankly, with all due respect, makes a certain amount of sense. Today, the farmers in the United States have a suicide rate that is double that of any other occupation. And I just saw a report from Colorado that their suicides are doubling every year. So when we call it fatal harvest, I don't think it's rhetorical at all. So the USDA did a study on this recently. Why are all the farmers committing suicide? As if they didn't know. And a lot of it had to do, of course, with the loss of finances, loss of their farms. But surprisingly, a lot of it was loss of their communities and a loss of their independence. That's what a lot of it was, you know. And so what has happened during most of my lifetime is that we have seen this industrial agricultural model grow more and more and more and more destructive. But they thought that was going to sort of be it. They thought we were headed to Jetson Land. But something happened on the way to Jetson Land, didn't it? That's why we're here. You happened. And we happened to be here. We happened. We said, no, that is not what's going to happen to this. It's not our food. It's not going to happen. So some people made an enormous contribution to that, and I want to quickly say sort of how much that they meant to me. And one is Rachel Carson, whose 50th anniversary of the book Silent Spring is this year. Fighting through lung cancer, she made the connection for a largely urban population and said, you need to make this connection. That poison that's going into your foods, that's going into you, and that is going into your children. Make the connection. Stop the poisons. In her famous book, of course, Silent Spring. Another great hero of mine is Cesar Chavez. Cesar Chavez was another guy who made the connections, right? He said to an urban population, don't you dare buy those grapes. Don't you dare buy that product unless you think about the people that are doing the work, the farm laborers out there, who are the ones really taking on the pesticide load, who are the ones that don't have education, the ones that are being underpaid. Think about the morality of what you're doing when you buy that product. And of course, started organizing and unionizing those workers. So great here. So people made those connections, then we began to get organic food, and then we began to have a vision even beyond organic food. I was very proud to be part of the Organic Food Production Act and help, devise that act and fight for it for 20 years. But I think as great as organic is, it's our great beachhead, we also know we need to go beyond organic. We need to go local. We need to go appropriate scale. We need to go humane to protect those 10 billion animals that are used every year in our factory farms. We need to, which is a terribly important issue, and we're working on that in CAFOs right now, we need to go for biodiversity. None of the organic rule doesn't really do any of those things, so we need to defend the organic rules and then evolve the ethic into those things. So we see this dramatic moment we're in right now, in the future of food for the 21st century. On one line is that industrial model with all of its cruelty and all of its destruction. And the other is this extraordinarily, and the fastest growing sector in American agriculture, which is organic and beyond agriculture. But unfortunately, which is one of the main topics we're here today, the industrial boys were not finished. In the end of the 19th century and the first several decades of the 20th century, the USDA's major job was collecting seeds from around the world and giving them free to farmers. They gave over 3 billion seeds to American farmers from 1862 through 1924. That's what they did. In 1924, Congress stopped the giving of seeds to farmers because they wanted to create the seed industry. From that point on, the seed industry decided we're going to change those seeds. First was the hybrid corn seed, where it was only good for one season. It was the first Terminator technology. Then they started creating seeds, especially in corn, where you could only use mechanized harvesting. And then as farmers went out of business because they couldn't afford the seeds and they couldn't afford the mechanization, more and more larger farms happened, more and more monocultures happened, and guess who showed up? The insects. All right, so then we got all the pesticides. And then as they were monoculturing crops over and over again, the soil became depleted. What do they add? Fertilizers. So as the farmer independence is robbed from them and the seed was transformed from the greatest symbol that we have of the resilience of life to nothing but a byproduct of corporations who are selling the seeds, selling the machines, selling the chemicals, selling the fertilizers, and the farmer just became a pass-through. And so in 70 short years, the American farmer lost his or her independence, and the companies took over the seeds. And then they had one more brilliant last idea. Let's actually transform the biology of the seed itself so that it can withstand ever greater amounts of our chemicals. Total transformation of the seed itself, their final triumph. Taking the seed from the symbol of life to something that is actually designed for more and more poisons to be poured onto it. And that is what we have with genetic engineering today. 85% of all crops that are grown in this country and around the world are designed to be herbicide tolerant. That means that they can withstand an absolute washing of weed killers, of herbicides, and not die. Huge for Monsanto and for the other chemical companies, terrible for the rest of us. And we fought this for years. As I said, we have a great line of victories, but we did not win in corn and soy, in this country especially. And so it's taken to this moment, and this extraordinary moment in time, where we talked about this earlier today, for the biotechnology industry to discover Charles Darwin. Because what happened was, after all of these hundreds of millions of pounds, and it's 115 million more pounds, 115 more million pounds of herbicides are put on our lands today because of GMO crops, every year. Every year. Well, what happens to the weeds when all that Roundup is poured on them? What do you think happens to the weeds? The Biology 01, right? They develop resistance. So we now have 30 million acres of weeds you can't kill with Roundup. So Dow Chemical said, great, Monsanto, they're going down. We'll come in with 2,4-D. So this is just sort of a slow version of the Dylan song I'm giving you, by the way, right now. So 2,4-D came in. 2,4-D is an element of Agent Orange, right? We call it Agent Orange crops. They're going backwards because we don't have any new herbicides. Roundup is the most recent herbicide we have. They're going backwards. It's a chemical armaments race going backwards to 2,4-D now. So Dow is about to get approval for 2,4-D corn and soy. So now there's going to be hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds of 2,4-D put onto our land. Dicamba says we're going to compete. So they have now, and this is already at the USDA, this is already up for approval, dicamba-resistant corn and soy. I don't know how enough people here know about dicamba, but it makes 2,4-D look like a tinker toy. Dicamba volatilizes, as does 2,4-D. You know what that means? It means in certain warm or rainy conditions, it comes back up in a cloud, and it can move for miles. So if you have an organic apple orchard over here, cloud comes over, there goes your apples. Volatilizes. So even conventional farmers have gone to the USDA and by the hundreds and some of the major groups and said, oh, that stuff's a nightmare. Don't do that. So Dave Mortensen at Penn State has said if we do not stop these crops within 7 years, there'll be 800 million more pounds of 2,4-D, of dicamba and Roundup poured on our crops every year. And just to give you an example, all the work we've done in organic, all of us, saves us about 40 million pounds a year. So you can see the nightmare that they have in store for us. And even then it's planned obsolescence, because sooner or later the weeds are going to get resistant to 2,4-D. They're going to get resistant to dicamba, and then what will we do? We have hundreds of millions of acres of weeds you cannot get rid of. So this is the kind of nightmare. So what is this about? Feeding the world. The lame shall walk. The blind shall see. That is not what these companies do. 2009, the Union of Concerned Scientists wrote a report I recommend to all of you, Failure to Yield, which shows there is no increase in yield. Zero. Then they came out with a report about Drought Guard, Monsanto's Drought Guard. You've seen it on PBS. Every drop of water, Monsanto, doesn't work. Can't work. It doesn't work. So this is a very dramatic moment again, because this is the final move of the industrial agriculture into the very essence of plants itself and into then their ownership, because Monsanto and two other companies now own 51% of all the world's commercial seeds. And that's the great work of Vandana, that's the great work of Nancy here on my right. Everyone out there who's saving seeds and protecting that diversity is a hero, is a tremendous hero, because we are creating an entire different seed system away from that corporate ownership. So what can we do? So what can we do? One of the things the companies say is, well, Andy, we have to be efficient in you're lovely people, but you're not efficient. We're efficient, you're not. And I always say, what if I were to tell you that I have a daughter, and I do, and she's in this room somewhere filming, and I treated her very efficiently when she was growing up. You do know what efficiency means, right? Minimum input for maximum output in minimum time. How's that? Not a great dad, huh? I didn't do that, did I, honey? I don't think so. I have a lovely English setter who I have the least efficient relationship with in the world. She does no work whatsoever. And I pour lavish affection and food on her. I don't know a single one of you who's farming, a single one of us who do the work we do. We don't do it out of efficiency. What do we do it out of? Love. Thank you. And how many times have you heard that in the legislature? How many times have you think we've heard that in court? But it's what we are. It's what we do. We need to defend that. We need to say, you know what? We're not about efficiency. Yes, machines should be efficient, but that's not humans and that's not plants. We're living things, and we live on love, not efficiency. Now, the next thing they'll tell you is, yeah, and because of that, you're not going to be competitive. And I said, okay. I don't only have a daughter, I have a son. And they would come back with the report cards, and let's say my daughter came in with a B and my son came in with an A, and I say, well, honey, you're the weakest link. Goodbye. Competition is always the ethic of elimination. If you go through and study any anthropologist, human beings did not survive based on competition. We survived based on... Thank you. We need to say to hell with their competition, to hell with their cutthroat capitalism, and yes to cooperation, because that's how we're going to survive. And then they try and put one last thing on you. They say, you know what? You're against progress. You ever heard that one? You're against progress. You know, this whole organic thing. It's like no chemicals, no irradiation, no GMOs. It's against progress. And I always tell them, progress towards what? Don't we get to decide what progress is? And we don't think progress is more poisons. And we don't think progress is monocultures. And we don't think progress is corporations owning our seeds. We think small and medium-sized farms using organic and beyond organic methods is progress. And we're not alone. The ISTAD report, the big UN report, said the way to feed the world is small and medium-sized sustainable organic farms using fewer and fewer inputs. That's how we're going to feed the world, and that's progress. And I think to finish, what was said before is very important to me. It was the woman who began, I'm sorry. The woman who began the beautiful song and the talk. Yeah, one of my great friends is Ralph Nader, and Ralph began the consumer movement. But I urge each and one of us, including me, consumer. They used to call tuberculosis consumption. Because it consumed the body. Fires consume houses. How in the hell did we get to be called consumers? What an incredibly de-energizing, nasty thing to think of ourselves as. I am not a consumer, and you are not a consumer. We are creators. And whether every decision we make, and I have not always made the right decisions, and I bet there's people in this audience who haven't always made the right decisions, but every decision we make in the food that we grow, in the food that we buy, in the food that we let our schools serve, every decision we make will go towards one of those futures I described, that industrial nightmare, or the organic and beyond future that we all want. Every decision we make, we are not consumers. Whether we like it or not, we are creators from every minute of our lives. Creators, not consumers. And so I'd like to finish by reading one of my very favorite authors, just a little bit, Wendell Berry. I don't know if people know the work of Wendell Berry. He's one of my great heroes. Now, I know this by heart, but Wendell is such a great writer. It's very short. I'm going to read it because if you get a single word of Wendell Berry's wrong, it is a mortal sin in the Catholic Church. Because he is such an extraordinary writer. This is something I recommend if people say grace, that this is an interesting grace you might want to say at meals. He says, to live, we must daily break the bread and shed the blood of creation. When we do it thinkingly, knowingly, lovingly, skillfully, reverently, it is a sacrament. When we do it greedily, clumsily, destructively, it is a desecration. And I think this desecration of the industrial food system, which is already over, because they're growing food in oil, and oil ain't going to be there. And they're trying to, use water that ain't going to be there. And they already have reached their peak herbicides. They don't have anything after this 240 a day. Their paradigm is already over. Their desecration is already over. It's our job to make it end as quickly as possible. Because that desecration not only creates the diseases of our children that you were mentioning earlier, Nancy, including what used to be called adult onset diabetes, which is now childhood diabetes, and high blood pressure in children, all the diseases. But as I said before, it creates sort of a one-night stand aspect with our food. You know, we don't care where it came from, we don't care where it's going to go. And that makes it seem to me morally and spiritually lonely. And also makes each of us complicit in the crimes of modern agriculture, the crimes against the crops, the crimes against the farmers, and the crimes against the animals, the unspeakable crimes against the 10 billion animals. And we can't be complicit in that anymore. So I recommend that we do what Wendell suggests, that together, thinkingly, knowingly, lovingly, skillfully, and most of all reverently, we create a new food future together. Thank you.